A single moment can break a life, and a single moment can save it. That truth became painfully real the day 12-year-old Emma Rowell, the only daughter of tech millionaire Jonathan Rowell, sat at the edge of the hospital bed, her small hands trembling, her eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to look at anyone. She had lost her hearing in the accident that took her mother, her laughter, and every dream she had ever carried. She hadn't spoken in months, not even with her hands. It was as if silence had swallowed her whole, leaving behind a shell of a child who once used to dance in the living room every morning. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of strangers who become angels, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Jonathan tried therapists, specialists, private tutors, even the most expensive sign language instructors in the country, but Emma had completely shut down. She wouldn't sign, she wouldn't write, she wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. It was like losing her mother had taken her voice, and losing her hearing had stolen the world altogether. Jonathan, despite all his wealth, felt helpless. He walked through his enormous glass mansion like a ghost, listening to the echo of his daughter's absence. The silence between them had become the loudest sound of his life. Nights were the worst. Sometimes he would stand by her door, watching her sleep curled into a tight ball, clutching the stuffed bear her mother had given her. Other times he sat in his office with his head in his hands, ashamed that a man who solved billion-dollar problems couldn't solve the suffering of his own daughter. One cold morning, everything changed when he drove Emma to a small rehabilitation center outside the city. It wasn't fancy or high-tech. Second, it was simple, warm, filled with children who were healing from invisible battles. Jonathan didn't expect anything special from this place. He was simply trying because he had to keep trying. That was when he noticed a young man helping a boy with a speech delay. The man knelt on the ground, using toys, facial expressions, and gentle gestures, not pushing, not demanding, just being present. The boy laughed, a full, bright, uninhibited laugh. Something about that moment made Jonathan pause. The young man's name was Lucas Hale, a single father raising a 6-year-old daughter. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't polished. He didn't wear expensive suits or imported shoes. But he had two things Jonathan had forgotten how to use: patience and heart. When Lucas first saw Emma, she was sitting stiffly in the corner chair of the assessment room, her eyes empty, her hands clasped tightly. Lucas approached slowly, not speaking, not smiling too broadly. He simply sat on the floor near her, leaving space. He started drawing on a small whiteboard. Rough shapes, funny faces, silly doodles. He never looked at her directly, just kept drawing quietly. After a few minutes, Emma's eyes flickered toward him. Not for long, just a second. But it was the first time she reacted to anything in months. Jonathan felt a strange chill. Hope wasn't something he trusted anymore, but something was different about this calm young man with gentle eyes and worn shoes. Lucas seemed to sense the weight on both Emma and her father. Slowly, consistently, he kept appearing every day, sitting near her, drawing new things, placing small toys where she could reach them, making the room feel less like a therapy center and more like a childhood again. But progress was painfully slow. Weeks passed. Emma didn't touch a toy, didn't smile, didn't write or sign. Jonathan felt himself losing faith again. He wondered if he was forcing something impossible, if his daughter would remain locked inside her grief forever. One winter afternoon, after a long, difficult session where Emma hadn't even lifted her head, Jonathan broke down in the hallway. He pressed his back to the wall, his hands over his face, and whispered that maybe it was time to give up. Lucas walked out and paused beside him. He didn't offer cliches or meaningless comfort. He simply sat next to Jonathan the same way he sat next to Emma, quietly, with presence, with sincerity. He explained how healing wasn't linear, how trauma didn't follow deadlines, how silence wasn't always refusal. Sometimes it was survival. Lucas asked permission to try something different. He wanted to bring his daughter, Mia, into one of the sessions. She was a cheerful little girl with wild curls and an energy that bounced like sunlight. Jonathan hesitated, unsure, but something in Lucas's steady gaze made him agree. The next day, Mia entered the therapy room holding a small box. She placed it near Emma and sat down, swinging her legs happily. Emma didn't look up. Mia opened the box and carefully pulled out a tiny handmade bracelet made of mismatched beads. She began stringing new beads onto the wire, humming softly, completely unconcerned with Emma's silence. She wasn't trying to fix Emma. She wasn't trying to heal her. She was just being a child. Something in the simplicity of that moment brushed against Emma's frozen heart. She lifted her eyes a fraction. Just enough to see the beads. Just enough to see Mia's small hands moving. Lucas watched, barely breathing. Jonathan felt his chest tighten in disbelief. Emma reached out, slow, trembling, and touched a bead. It was the first voluntary movement toward another person since the accident. The entire room froze. Mia smiled, unaware of the miracle she'd just caused. She gently pushed the bead closer. Emma took it. Her fingers shook. Tears pooled in Jonathan's eyes. Lucas felt a rush of emotion he had no words for. Something had cracked open in Emma. Not fully, not suddenly, but enough to let a sliver of light enter. Over the next few days, Emma began selecting beads. Not speaking, not signing, but participating. Engaging, living. Jonathan couldn't sleep at night. Not from fear this time, but from overwhelming gratitude. Lucas stayed patient, guiding her, letting her set the pace. He learned to communicate with her through facial expressions, slow movements, gestures she could read. He turned every session into a sanctuary of safety. One quiet afternoon, after Mia gifted Emma another bead, Lucas leaned in close enough for her to read his lips and whispered with genuine promise, "I'll help you." Something about those words, the softness, the steadiness, the absolute lack of pressure, reached her. Emma touched his hand briefly before pulling away, but the gesture was enough to confirm what they all prayed for. She trusted him. Weeks turned into months. Emma's world began to expand again. She started using basic signs. She began drawing. She even smiled once, a tiny, hesitant smile that made Jonathan feel like he could breathe again for the first time in a year. Lucas and Mia had become more than helpers. They had become part of their lives, part of their healing. Jonathan found himself sitting with Lucas after sessions, talking about fatherhood, grief, guilt, and the strange, unpredictable ways life brings people together. But healing is never smooth. One day, during a session, Emma froze. A loud thud echoed from the hallway, a sound she couldn't hear but felt through the vibration of the floor. It reminded her of the car crash. Her hands shook violently, her breath quickened, and she curled into a ball the way she used to. Jonathan panicked, running to her, but Lucas gently blocked him, raising a calming hand. He knelt beside Emma, slowly placing his hand on the floor so she could feel the vibrations of his movements. He guided her breathing with exaggerated motions, letting her mirror him. It took nearly half an hour, but eventually Emma lifted her eyes to his. And in that moment, she wasn't looking at her mother's absence. She was looking at the man who was teaching her how to live again. Near the end of the school year, something extraordinary happened. Emma brought Lucas a small drawing, 4 people holding hands, Emma, her father, Lucas, and Mia. It wasn't perfect. The lines were shaky. The colors didn't stay inside the shapes. But it was the first drawing she had made since losing her mother. Lucas stared at it with tears filling his eyes. Jonathan quietly stepped outside so his own tears wouldn't be seen. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe for more emotional stories, and let us know how it made you feel. Before I end this story, please leave a special comment. What part of Emma's journey gave you hope today? Jonathan later framed the drawing and placed it in the center of their home, not as a reminder of pain, but of the miracle that arrived quietly in the form of a single dad and his bright little girl. Lucas kept his promise. Emma learned to speak through her hands, her drawings, her courage, and a broken family found healing from someone who had once whispered only 3 words, "I'll help you."